Brian Jones. Brian Jones taught elementary school for 9 years in New York City's public schools and is currently pursuing a PhD in urban education at the City University of New York Graduate Center. He was the Green Party's 2014 candidate for Lieutenant Governor of New York. Brian co-narrated the film, The Inconvenient Truth Behind Waiting for Superman, and has contributed to several books, including What's Race Got to Do with It? How Current School Reform Policy Maintains Racial and economic inequality. Brian's commentary and writing have been featured in a wide range of forums, including MSNBC, the New York Times Room, For Debate Blog, Democracy Now!, and the International Socialist Review. Brian is the recipient of the 2012 Lannan Cultural Fellowship. Please give a wee welcome for Brian Jones.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me without the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just get a little forward. It truly is an honor to have this opportunity to address what I believe are the future leaders of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. It's as thrilling for me as I hope it is for you that we're gathered here today to make history, as was just said. I would feel strange if I did not say something about Paris. And so I just want to read out what a friend of mine wrote on Facebook, because she put it better than I could. We do not live in a world of irreconcilable civilizations. The people behind the attacks of the past week may want us to think so. The jingoistic response to these attacks no doubt will promote this idea. But it's a lie. In the upcoming days and months, we are going to have to fight like hell for the idea that war and oppression are what got us here, and more of the same will only make our world less safe. My heart goes out to the people of France, Lebanon, Iraq, and Afghanistan. In the time that I have left, and by the way, I think I'm going to get you to your first workshops early, if not on time. I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about what we're up against as I see it. I want to talk about the centrality of racism and anti-racism to our struggle. And thirdly, I want to talk about the hope in our current situation. First, what we're up against. To me, you could sum it up as a bid for power, ideology, and profit. And I put profit last because we often are tempted to put it first, but I really do believe that what's going on in K-12 education is a power struggle, that every facet of it can be described that way. In that book, excuse me, puberty's happening. In that book that was just mentioned, where I contributed a chapter, What's Race Got to Do with It, the authors in the beginning describe a metaphor that they use to try to understand corporate education reform, and it's the metaphor of the Hydra, that Greek monster with many heads and one body. And to them, they use that analogy because it seemed like that was the kind of thing they were fighting. It's like you chop off one, you try to stop the charter school thing, and then here comes school closings, here comes another head. You try to stop the school closings, and here comes high-stakes standardized testing. You're whacking at these different things, but they actually have a common root and a common source. And for them, that analogy spoke to the feeling of futility that many people had trying to fight this thing. And it spoke to the necessity of a holistic interpretation, a way of understanding them as all connected. The reason I want to emphasize in this talk the issue of power in fighting the Hydra is that I think it's important to understand where teachers sit in the current political economy of the United States. K-12 public school educators are the most unionized, non-uniformed occupation in the country. You're it. You are in the public sector, which is 5 times more unionized than the private sector. That means that the people who favor privatization, deregulation, profit-making, in that ripping up all of that social contract and figuring out a way to reorganize it, thank you. Water. Speaking of privatization. The people who favor that kind of a reorganization face an obstacle in the public sector, and more than anywhere else in the public sector, face in K-12 schooling an organized opposition in the form of you, teacher unions. And that is the reason, I believe, why teachers have caught such hell, have felt that you have a target on your back everywhere you turn. Magazine covers about sweeping away the bad teachers, a virtual witch hunt in the media, that the most important thing we've got to do is figure out who's a goodie and who's a baddie. That's what we've got to do urgently, is have a witch hunt for the bad teachers. There's a labor journalist, Lee Sustar, who writes for socialistworker.org, who argues that the things they are doing to teachers today are virtually identical to what they did to the UAW, the United Auto Workers. Historically, a site of working class power in the United States, and we should add black power, black working class power in the United States, now decimated, a shell of its former self. The UAW faced plant closings. You face school closings. The UAW faced outsourcing to non-union facilities. You face charter schools. The UAW, they introduced into the UAW a tier system. So the new hires are in a different situation than the older, more senior teachers. You've got Teach for America. Teach for America contracts in city after city where they are the preferred source of new teachers. This is not an educational policy. What they are doing to our schools has nothing to do with teaching and learning, and the whole trying to figure out how to reason with them over it makes no sense. This is a labor policy. This is an economic policy. This is a power play that is not in the interest of our children. It's not in the interest of teaching and learning, and it's certainly not in the interest of building up the kinds of lives that people have been able to make in this country based on unionized labor. To me, one of the issues that shows it the clearest is class size. Because one of the ways they historically destroy unions is by trying to use fewer and fewer of you. They did it in auto, they did it in steel, and now they're trying to do it to teachers. That's why, even though I could pile up to this ceiling the research that shows that small class sizes are better for kids, that small class sizes are better for teaching and learning, and by the way, we know this because where Bill Gates or Michael Bloomberg or any of them send their kids, it's like 12 to 14 to a class. Tops. We know that they know it's good for kids. They know it. But the reason they won't give us small class sizes is that means hiring more of you. That means building your strength, not taking it away. So they cannot accept the idea that small class sizes should be at the top of their priority list in terms of the millions of dollars that they are spending to try to transform our schools. They will spend millions on test preparation. They will spend millions on data analysts. They will spend millions on systems of monitoring and measurement, but they will not spend that same money to lower class sizes because that would change the power dynamic in our favor, not in theirs, and they know that. I'm in church, so I'm going to preach. Now, I want to say some things that, I don't know if everybody agrees with everything I'm going to say. That's okay. We can disagree. But I'm going to, I have this pulpit, so I'm going to say what I actually think. Which is this, that part of the reason our unions are in the SHIT that they're in is that they have believed for a long time that they could rely on the Democratic Party to do it for them. Part of the reason we are catching so much HE double hockey sticks down here in the schools is because we cannot rely on either of these political parties, Democrats or Republicans, or play them against each other in our favor. We can't do it because they are united in this agenda. This is not the Tea Party and ALEC, although it is them. Absolutely, it is them, and they're involved. This is also the liberals.
That's right. Yeah.
This is Obama. This is Governor Cuomo in New York. Both of them are united in this agenda, and that's, I think, part of why this has been so difficult for us down here. It's not just old money and old industry, it's new money. And Facebook and Apple and technology, they agree on this agenda, and that's part of what we're up against. Now, sadly, I have to say too, and I think we have to say, that at the highest levels of our union organizations, they have, at best, been passive in the face of these attacks. At the highest levels. And at worst, they've been complicit in it. Their strategy was to join it, was to be in on it, was to sit at the table. And we see what that has gotten us. We have let the wolf in the door. And the wolf doesn't want to talk. The wolf wants to eat. That is why what you're doing is so important. You're here because you see the need for a union within the union. You see the need for a new movement of educators to transform our unions, hopefully and potentially. That is what we're trying to build, and that's why it's so necessary. In New York, for a long time, the educators who were activists were bifurcated, you might say. There were people who were kind of the justice-oriented people, interested in issues of racism and inequality, focused on curriculum and working with the kids and trying to bring issues from the world into the classroom. And they considered what they closed the door of their classroom, and they considered what they did in their classroom, that was their activism. And then on the other hand, you had the trade unionists. The people who came maybe from other unions or other radical groups and saw working as a teacher, mainly it's about being a trade unionist and fighting over budgets and contracts and negotiations and all this sort of thing. And these two groups did not get together for the longest time. They saw things differently. But increasingly, corporate education reform, I believe, has made it impossible to have either of those approaches separate from each other. And these two groups, I'm proud to say, are getting together increasingly, and really the formation of the caucus that I was part of founding, the movement of rank and file educators in the United Federation of Teachers, represents the joining of these two groups together. People feeling that something has to change in our union, and it's related to issues of justice, related to issues of racism, and that sort of thing, and it's about using our power as a union to make the changes that we need. One of the things I'm curious to know about your group and how you conceive of yourselves is, if you are guided by a vision, how broad is your group? We are trying to organize a union here. That means we want to embrace all of our coworkers, and we understand that all of our coworkers aren't necessarily, thinking along the lines that we're thinking all the time. I mean, as an extreme example, in New York, when a man was choked to death on camera by the police, some teachers marched with his family in the streets calling for justice. And other teachers wore NYPD t-shirts to school the next day to signify their solidarity with the police. So teachers are not all on the same page necessarily, and I'm sure you understand that from your experience. And so it raises a challenge for us. How do we reach out to people who do not yet agree with us? How do we try to shift the ideas that currently exist in our union? And this gets me to the issue of the centrality of racism. I think we can't understate the centrality of racism to the history of the United States, and especially to what we are here to do. We are here to do today, and that is build a working class movement in the United States. Unfortunately, our unions in this country have a checkered past, to say the least, when it comes to this issue. And it has ever been their Achilles heel. I think that is because working people, and especially organized working people, have conflicting impulses. We have what you might call a craft impulse in the labor movement and an industrial impulse. The craft impulse has been to organize ourselves along sectional lines and protect our craft against all other workers. We're not going to let you in. We're going to try to hold on to our little thing over here, and we are against and in competition with other groups of people. The industrial impulse was to open the labor movement to all people, regardless of skill, regardless of education or what have you, try to, by opening our arms to the broadest possible membership, strengthen our numbers and make it impossible for them to divide people against each other. The craft impulse has often been racist in the history of the United States labor movement, let's just be honest. And the biggest explosion of unions in this country in the 1930s came when they finally figured out that they had to overcome the issue of racism if they were going to survive as a labor movement, and they had to admit black people into the unions. That was a huge step forward. Where I come from in New York City, in 1968, we had what I think you can only describe as a racist strike. That is, a strike against a section of the black community that was trying to gain more control over their schools when they were frustrated and felt like they had been historically and systematically underserved and mistreated in the school system. The union went on strike to try to crush the power of the community control experiment. That led to a situation in the 1970s where, facing budget deficits, the city then wanted to cut services and cut union members. And these people, who should have been natural allies, had been already successfully pitted against each other, and both groups lost out. People lost services, and thousands of jobs were lost. The good news is that we, I believe, are part of a new movement in teacher unionism that is trying to learn the lessons of that experience very consciously. In Chicago in 2012, I'm sure many of you are aware that a new group was elected to power a few years before, and they went on strike in 2012, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators. When they went on strike, they consciously went after this issue. They boldly proclaimed the Chicago public school system to be an apartheid school system, and they used that word. By the way, just like everywhere else, most of the Chicago teachers are white. They called the school system in which they worked an apartheid school system. And they put before the parents, the students, and the media, and the world which schools have libraries and which ones don't. Which ones have air conditioning and which ones don't. And they said, we're going on strike. And wouldn't you know it, Black and Latino parents overwhelmingly supported the strike. The people inconvenienced. White parents, who overwhelmingly do not have their kids in the public school system, overwhelmingly oppose the strike. Didn't affect them at all. Go figure. The following year in Portland, the teachers union literally took the page, the title of the Chicago Teacher Union document, The School Chicago's Children Deserve, and copied it to Portland. They put out a document called The Schools Portland's Children Deserve. They put at the top of their list that they were fighting for as they prepared for contract negotiations, class size. Portland class sizes are ridiculous. And they consciously sought out to speak with the same voice as students and parents and raised some of these same issues. And wouldn't you know it, we saw in the lead up to their strike, we saw students walking out of classes carrying signs and raising chants that said, we support the teachers. Less testing, more teaching, and Black student power. And when they won smaller class sizes, when they won hiring for more jobs for the Portland Teachers Union, the students felt as if they had participated in winning that contract. I even heard one student refer to it as his contract. They said, well, what do you think about the contract? He said, yeah, we got a good contract. In Seattle this year, I'm sure many of you are aware that and in Portland they didn't end up going on strike, by the way. This was a build up to a strike that didn't happen. They won with that ramp up and with that build up. In Seattle this year, we see teacher unionists who did go on strike and again consciously raise the issue of racism and the disproportionate impact of these policies, of corporate ed reform policies, on students of color, particularly on black students. They raised, overwhelmingly white teaching force, by the way, they raised the issue in their contract negotiations of the overwhelmingly disproportionate impact of suspensions on black students. They said, who is getting suspended and why and for what reasons, and in which schools? And they demanded in their contract negotiations that they have race and equity teams in every school. Look, I think they asked for 75 schools in the first round of negotiations. They didn't get 75 schools, I believe they got 34, something like this. But this was a demand that they raised and won. And in the course of doing so, they overwhelmingly, once again, got community support for their strike. They had, soup for teacher people organizing all kinds of things in solidarity with the strike. The city was unable to drive a wedge between the community and the teachers. And importantly, the Black Lives Matter organization came out with a public statement saying the struggle of the teachers is our struggle too. That's an amazing accomplishment given where we've come from as teacher unions, that they did that in Seattle, an important example for us. I think lately we've been seeing, in the past few days, we've been seeing a new, incredible, and very important development, and that is the rise, once again, of a black college student movement. This is a great thing. And if you think about it, the Black Lives Matter movement in some ways has been at a lull from where it was a year ago when we were in the streets all the time. There's been a kind of lull, and I think at least the feeling from New York is like searching for what can we do to pull on some levers of power somewhere. Is it about voting? Is it about stopping traffic? Like, what is it that we have to do to try to get change? And then you see the football team at the University of Missouri refuse to play football. It's an amazing thing, and honestly, to me, that speaks to the very basic question that brings us all here, which is the importance of the labor movement. That is, those football players are workers, and then we refuse to do the work, everything grinds to a halt, and suddenly there's going to be big changes. That is the power that you also hold. That you hold. That stress, that tension that you feel in your... It's just Saturday. That means you just finished the work week. Everything that's been building up all week in your body is, what work has done to you from the week, but it's also because you have power, because you are doing the work that is essential to making Philadelphia run. We have tremendous untapped power, and in just a few cities, we have begun to flex our muscles, but we have only just begun. Now, listen, it's not all sunshine and roses. I'm trying to, they asked me to be inspiring. I was working on that, But, a note of caution is that because this is, when we start looking at it in kind of straight power terms, us and them, and we start having that kind of, honest assessments of what's going on, we understand that in many places, we were able to kind of astonish them with our solidarity in the first round, but only in the first round. Because we've seen now successive rounds in Chicago where, frankly, they've, gotten their butts kicked. Because the American ruling class has a lot of tools at its disposal. When they lose at the negotiating table, they're going to go back to the courts. And then they're going to go back to the media. And then they're going to go back to all of their other institutions and wealth and everything they have at their disposal. And the question becomes, not only can we rely on ourselves and our solidarity and then spread it to the community, but can we then escalate further? Can we bring football players into our struggle? Can we bring other unions? Can we, and this is where the question of an industrial outlook matters. Because when they throw everything they have at you to make an example out of you, who are your friends going to be? Is it going to be the janitorial staff? Is it going to be HERE or SEIU? Or who is it going to be who will stand with you in the fire in those moments? That is the kind of unbreakable solidarity that we have to build if we're going to win against these people. That's what we have to do. And we have to think of it that way. Last 2 points. In New York, we have tremendous debates about how to carry this vision into our workplace. It seems to me like you are having a great success here in Philadelphia, so I'm really eager to learn from you as well, but I'll just offer some thoughts, which is that it seems to me we have to have patience and impatience. Patience with each other in our debates and disagreements and discussions, and patience, I would argue, with our coworkers who are not there yet. But please hear me. Your coworkers may surprise you. The last may be first. The people who are the most apathetic and uninterested might rush to the front and run ahead of you, and then you have to catch up. You know, and they're asking you why you weren't at the meeting. That can happen. People can change. So we have to be patient and understanding with our coworkers, I would argue, while we're trying to bring them along into this thing. But we have to maintain a spirit of impatience with the people in charge. Impatience with the people who have put us. And impatience with what they're doing to our children. And I say this now as a teacher and as a parent. My 5-year-old just entered kindergarten this year. And, I am just filled with terror about the ways that it seems like every year they are concocting new and better ways to make kids hate school at an earlier age. And we have to be about the business of ending that. I was given a book this summer as a gift, and it was written by Marcus Rediker and Peter Linebaugh. And it may seem unrelated to you, but stay with me. It's about the beginning of capitalism, the Atlantic world, the triangular trade, the factories, the plantations, the ships that were workplaces that had sailors of many different races and the early nations aboard them. And it turns out that in the very beginning, when they were setting this whole thing up, they faced a problem. The problem was the sailors mutinied all the time. It was a constant problem. They had to do hangings and torture and turn to sharper and sharper methods to try to restrain them. The slaves revolted over and over again. In Haiti, they got their freedom and won the first free black nation. That inspired the sailors, who then spread the stories, and it inspired the workers in the factories in England to try to go on strike. They faced what they described, and these historians were constantly just quoting the literature from the ruling class, the colonial powers of that day, what they described as a hydra. From their perspective, you chop off one head and it springs up somewhere else. Here's my note of inspiration to you. Sometimes when we feel the futility, we feel like they're the hydra. But we want to remember that to them, we are the hydra. We are the hydra that springs up again and again and again. Because it's our lives, and they won't stop messing with us. And it's our children, and they won't stop messing with our children. And that's why they keep, no matter how they keep trying to push the programs or back off them or rebrand them or what, teach strong, whatever kind of rebranding they're constantly trying to do. Eventually, the tension resides in our shoulders. We're the ones who have to live with it, and that's why we are a movement that arises again and again and again. I wish you nothing but success at this conference. I'm thrilled and inspired to be here, and I hope that you strike the next blow for fighting for our schools and our unions. Thank you very much.
Act 46 in other cities, is that hanging over as far as consequences? The consequences connected here when you strike.
Yeah, my understanding is no, not in every city. That's not the thing. Yeah, that's right. And that is a big difference. And I'll just say this: that's right. It does hold people back, and that's why I think we really have to think. I was just speaking with a comrade over here about the necessity of preparing people and having discussions about this. I mean, you know, when the union started, they were illegal, so it was all breaking the law. So we have to, I think we have to prepare people in advance and have discussions about those fears and have enough time for people to think it through, digest it, and decide that that's what they want to do despite the consequences. Unfortunately, in New York City, our union leadership spends so much time scaring the members with a strike that it's barely, you know, it's difficult for us to introduce the argument like we should scare the employers with a strike. But that is a real challenge that we face. I mean, one last point is that is real risk. I mean, when you go on strike, it's always risky. But when you go on strike with those kinds of legal consequences, with a sword over your head, you're risking everything in the whole organization. And so it's very high stakes. Yeah.
But, yeah.
Brian was on another the BAT, the Badass Teachers Association. Director, etc. And also on the quality of work-life team, which is what we did a survey of AFT members around the country last April on what things were stressing them at school, because there's been a lot of depression and suicides and mental anguish because of corporate education policies. We got in to go to Arnie Duncan's office and sit at the board table in July. And straight no chaser gave the research statistics, et cetera, We talked about race, that was mine, ageism, suicide, stress, disability people, how we're being treated. They were very impressed. Now, you can imagine how I felt when Teach Strong came out and Randy Weingarten made a statement as to why the hell would the AFT join Teach Strong? And lo and behold, in the articles, she used our work that we did, the quality of work life team, to kind of as a justification that she wasn't really selling us out, that she was going with solidarity of us. And we're in a state of rage right now over that. You know, we're going to have to tell her, listen, we understand you got us in the door, but this is our work. We own it. We own that research. These are our people we're fighting for. The people you're sitting at the table with T. Strong are the people who caused the anguish that made us do the survey. And to say that you're going to be part of that, that doesn't sit well with us. What do you think about that, Brandon?
I'm with you. Can I just say one more thing about co-optation? So that is a pattern that they are trying to figure out how to co-opt, aspects of what we do. And I think Teach Strong, is part of that. Like, how can they speak to the anger that they know teachers are feeling and kind of bring them into the fold? And that's constantly a danger that we face. I will just say one more thing that I forgot to mention, which is that one of the biggest co-optations going on, in my view, right now, is the whole appropriation of all of the language of the civil rights movement.
That's right.
Like, whoa. So all of this, like privatization of school closing and charter schools and testing, is in the name of racial justice. So that's preposterous. And yet, because we haven't had a strong movement, I feel like it's when we're not on our feet, they are able to appropriate all of that language and use it. But that means that it's even more important for us to speak clearly to those issues so that we can clarify for people actually what is actual justice and what it actually looks like. Because this is a sword that is going to be in somebody's hand. Like, it's not going to not be used or not talked about. It is going to be a sword in their hand, or it is going to be a sword in our hand, one way or the other. So better for us to be clear about what we're doing to fight for real justice.
That's right.
I like how you talked about the mostly white teaching forces in Chicago and Seattle, and how they were able to build solidarity with communities of color. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more specifically about ways that the organizations did that work to be sure that they were like really working in the best interests of the communities and the students and the families.
Well, examples abound, but they look generally like what it seems to be some of the things that you all are doing. That is, they joined with parents and community members in the ongoing struggles that were already in process. The school system in Chicago is going to close a library. The parents want to do a sit-in, and it's like they show up with their caucus t-shirts and do the stuff the union should have been doing in solidarity. So that when people, so that then when the teachers needed that solidarity to come the other way, people were like, yeah, we got you. Because you had us, even when you were not in power. So it's a lot of like genuine grassroots building. What we have operating right now in a lot of union leaderships is like quid pro quo back scratching kind of thing. Like heads of organizations, dialoguing, meeting at 2 o'clock when nobody can join them to figure out what it's going to be. And what we need is a kind of genuine grassroots solidarity on the ground floor. And that's those organic relationships built in common struggle, I think then naturally lead to coming up with demands when it's time to sit at the negotiating table. Now look, in Milwaukee, they brought parents into the negotiation. I mean, that is taking a big risk. But wow, if that's not going to win you a lot of cred and solidarity when it comes time to really face the consequences. So those are some of the things that I think people are doing.
I think this speaks to the fear that our union leadership right now is putting out there. We had one of our reps come to the school and say, well, Chicago, is great and all, but then they struck and then they closed schools. So that's what's going to happen to you. Watch out. You strike the sub-service right now is going to come in. Source for teachers. Yeah, source for teachers. Can you speak to, I don't know what the question is, but just... Yeah, there's threats.
I mean...
There are threats, and they're real consequences. So.
Well, like people were starting to say right over here, I mean, they're doing these things anyway.
Yeah,
so at some point, people have to get their heads around the logic of like, well, if we fight, we at least have a chance of winning.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, what's the strategy of not fighting? Not fighting, hope that they do things to us.
Part of me wants to buy into that. Part of me is like, oh yeah, you're right. And the fear part of me goes with that. So I guess.
Right, but I think we have to be honest about the fear. Like, it's real. They will try to do things to bite us back. Like, especially if you are perceived as winning, they don't like that. They don't sit around and say, well, I guess the teachers won, Just sitting here with all these piles of money and resources at our disposal, but I guess the teachers won. No, they don't do that. Like, they spend all day strategizing about how to get us back. Like, that's what they do for a living. Meanwhile, we're trying to teach and stuff. No, really, this is all they do. Most people, a few radical organizers aside, most people don't go into teaching in order to do radical organizing. Most people go into to do teaching. And suddenly we're called upon to fight a war. And it's like, we don't even have swords. I don't even know how to make a sword. We're suddenly trying to build up our forces to fight while they're coming over the walls. Yes.
What's the end game in your opinion?
That's a good question. Okay, well, in some places,
What was the question?
the question, what's the end game? From their perspective, let's look around the country. Detroit, New Orleans. There are some places where they basically have had an open field, and they've just done everything that they've wanted, and it looks horrible. For example, in New Orleans, it's a very hierarchical system. It's all charters, no union. People are paler and wealthier as you go up, and the schools get better and better, and darker and lower income as the schools get worse and worse at the bottom. Parents have a 95-page booklet of kindergartens to flip through and try to choose one, but the schools also do choosing.
And all the top-rated schools aren't even in the booklet. I mean, you can just go on and on. The managers of the New Orleans system do not consider themselves in charge of the schools. They say we are portfolio managers. We manage a portfolio of schools, and by opening and closing, selecting and deselecting, we will eventually get, all great schools. And we understand the free market doesn't. The free market is, winners and losers. And these are children we're talking about. So we don't want to set up a system with losers built into it. But that's what they're moving towards. I don't think their end game big picture is to get rid of all public schools, because I think they want to use public schools as a repository for everybody who doesn't get into a selective system. But they want to introduce competition as the guiding principle, with test scores as the coin of competition, as the guiding principle for how school and life is organized. And by the way, that I think is about their arrogance at saying, this is how we've revolutionized industry, therefore schools are out of touch with this. This is how Walmart works, how UPS works. Just-in-time production, real-time data on all of your performance. We can see to the nanosecond how that driver is walking from the truck to the car and delivering, and then they go beep and whatever. So they want 4-year-olds to get used to keeping their numbers up, or else anything can happen to them. Anything can happen to you, 4-year-old, if you don't keep your numbers up. You can lose your school, you can lose your teacher, we can shut this whole thing down. We owe you nothing. Keep your numbers up. And that kind of data management of us is what they are trying to develop as the kind of culture of life and work. Real-time data on your performance. Bill Gates spent millions to develop a bracelet that kids would wear. And the motion of the bracelet would tell you how engaged the students were in the classroom, so that we can have real-time data on the teacher's ability to keep the students engaged. Their obsession with using data in the way that it has revolutionized tech and revolutionized industry, they want to use it to revolutionize school. And to bring school in line with working life everywhere else. That's their end game, I think. And that's why we have to say that's not a good way to work at Walmart. It's not humane what they're doing to people. So I don't know why the board of Walmart is suddenly going to be a guide for what we should do with children. But look at how they treat adults. And guess what? Children grow up. Okay, so. I can go on and on. Yes.
Yeah. I'm very glad that you spoke about philosophical foundations of capitalism connected to the triangular trade system. I mean, I teach that in my class myself. But when we talk about how do you speak on these issues openly without coming off, because these ideas are marginalized. They're not mainstream. So when you talk about educational apartheid, people recall and what do you mean apartheid? This isn't South Africa. Or when you talk about testing, opt your child out. You're what are you talking about? How am I going to send my child to the high school that they won't be thrown away? I'm not going to sacrifice my child. How do we speak honestly without becoming a fringe group?
That is a $1 million question. And no, absolutely. Okay, when we first started, or before we had more, I was part of a group called the Grassroots Education Movement, and one of our big things, I was teaching in East Harlem, and the charter school thing was crazy. It was ground zero for charter schools. And we were speaking and writing about the charter school thing as honestly as we could. A vice president of the U of T at the time sat me down and said, Brian, you need to stop doing this, because there's no constituency for what you're saying. Parents love these charter schools. And I was okay, well, no, I'm not going to do that. But here's what we did. Here's what our approach was. We decided that we were going to aim our fire at the people in charge, the people running the networks, the people funding them. We were going to have a different tone and approach while saying the same things to the charter school parents, to the charter school teachers and charter school students, because they didn't set this crazy thing up. And it turns out that increasingly, if you look at the film, Inconvenient Truth, Behind Waiting for Superman, almost every parent in there is a charter school parent, actually, because through their experience, they came over to our side. So I think we've got this, and not everybody, but there is now a debate, finally, because people have been through it enough that they're starting to, some people were taken in the first instance, and now they're starting to learn through experience. So I think we have to stick to our guns and be really open to talking to, and not blaming, and not attacking, and not wagging our finger at parents who are just trying to do the best they can. They have set up a competitive system for parents, basically. And so what are parents supposed to do? They're trying to compete. And we have to say, look, we understand what you're trying to do, but the fact is, this is doing us all a disservice by pitting us all against each other. And I think it's not going to connect with the majority of people until we have a struggle on our hands that people can participate in that can show another way. The fact is, it's going to be a minority, hopefully a growing minority, okay? Hopefully a growing minority. We don't want to just sit here and like pat ourselves on the back for having figured all this out. Like, we have to figure out a way to communicate. If we're not a growing minority, we're dying, by the way. If we're not growing, always attracting new people, then something is very wrong with what we're doing, and we are dying. I think one thing we can do is help people connect the dots. People they experience this and they get angry, and we can say, yes, you know what, you're right to be angry about this, but what you're angry about over here is connected to what's happening over there. Okay, we can start from where people are at and then try to take them somewhere. One thing I really like about your caucus is you all seem to be guided by a vision. You have ideas and you are guided by those ideas. That's important. Hold on to those ideas because this is a rocky road. You know, they're going to try to bounce you off of them. But I think we have to figure out a way to connect with what people are directly experiencing and then bring them around. But, you know, other than those general guidelines, I don't have $1 million answer to that.
Okay, we don't have time for more questions. I lied, and I'm sorry. And, you know, in church, I go to church every Sunday, so, you know, I'll deal with that.
Anyway.